Right, so let's hop back into it. It's a quick session on Aggregating. So much here, but we'll turn up. And books running a bit late because it's getting his daughter. Okay, interfederation. What's this all about? Interfederation is interconnecting national federations together. And there are two that we generally talk about. There's Aggregating, which is the interfederation of identity federations, and Aggregating, which is a confederation of radius servers across the world to bring those together. With both of these, there's no longer any single legal policy framework because we're going across multiple nations. Each federation has its own Aggregating as well. Each federation has their own policy framework, and Aggregating has its own policy framework. So there's frameworks within frameworks here. There's no single interfederation help desk. There is an Aggregating help desk, but it deals basically with dealing with federations and not with end users. They're there to help debugging stuff across federational boundaries. It needs the involvement of each of the federation parties and the entity operators at each end. So it's a bit difficult to do end-to-end debugging of stuff, and it will take a lot longer in the interfederation world. And the other thing is that different sets of attributes are used internationally. So one federation will release lots of attributes, another might not release many unless actually prompted to. That's depending on the rules of each of the federations and the rules of each of the individual identity providers. The Europeans have been doing interfederation for a lot longer, and they started a base with very few attributes, and that's now causing them a lot of problem. Whereas what we've been training to do in the Asia Pacific region is to make a wider set of attributes available that covers most common use cases, and that seems to work quite nicely. And most of the participating identity providers don't seem to have a problem with the release of the set of attributes that we've defined. They're fairly generic information about users, including their email address and their names. So Aggregating example, this is a potential what Aggregating looks like. Aggregating provides a policy framework and standards to build trust. So there's all this trust stuff again. Federations about trust between the various parties. We have service providers and identity providers participating in a federation. They can opt in for Aggregating, or they can opt out. There's two different ways that federations can have their members join. A lot of the earlier participants had opt-out for all IDPs and service providers, and that's caused a fair bit of grief because there was no verification that they met a certain level or baseline level when they joined. So just threw them all in and hoped for the best. That has caused some issues, and these are the things that we are working through with defining baseline levels of setup, configuration, etc., to ensure a high level of connectivity or a high level of success when a user tries to access a service that's in another federation. And we have the metadata service, which sits in the middle and provides an aggregate of all of the metadata provided from all of the federations. And everything needs metadata to work. Each entity needs to know about every other entity, so it can communicate effectively between the entities. So we have three federations participating here: Federation A, B, and C. Federation A is providing 2 identity providers and 1 service. Federation B is only providing a couple of services. And Federation C is providing both an IDP and a service provider. That's pretty unrealistic. Most federations will probably try and have all of their IDPs be part of it, and run it as an opt-out, whereas service providers will tend to be opt-in. The ours are all opt-in, the service providers, and actually we have ours as opt-in for identity providers. The value of having opt-in for everything is that you then get to verify that they are meeting the appropriate levels of the baseline, at least, for interoperability. We've got a metadata exchange process that occurs underneath the covers. Each federation publishes a metadata file with the entities that it wants to interfederate. The Aggregating metadata services fetch these files on a regular basis. It's usually less than 24 hours. I'm not sure what their current rate is, but it's something significantly less than 24 hours. And then Aggregating will aggregate all the metadata together, throw out things that are causing issues. So the whole federation's metadata might be thrown out because of a problem in one entity, so you need to make sure your metadata is good. And it aggregates all the good stuff together and republishes it. Federations then grab that metadata, filter out their own entities, and in some cases filter out other entities that they're not interested in. And in the AAF, we filter out everything except those that are tagged as research and scholarship services, and those that have been identified by our community as valuable services to provide from Aggregating. And again, that's to ensure at least the highest level of possibility that a user will successfully authenticate. So we're doing a bit of curating of the metadata to try and weed out problem issues before they actually become problems within our federation. And at the end of the day, all the entities consume the federated Aggregating metadata if they're connected, in addition to the federation metadata. So there's 2 feeds generally coming into IDPs or SPs that are in Aggregating. With all that metadata, they know about all the other IDPs and services in Aggregating and then can effectively work with them. Okay. We've got some constitutional and policy stuff that's provided by Aggregating. They've got a governance and governing bodies. There's an executive committee, a steering group. I'm currently the chair of that steering group. Hopefully that will finish by the end of the year, and a new chair will be appointed. But that may be different chairing of a different group, a subgroup of the Aggregating community, based on feedback from the Aggregating 2.0 work that's been going on. We've got the operations team, which is a paid-for team that keeps the technology ticking over and provides some support to federations when they connect. So federations must primarily serve the interests of the education and research sector, provide endpoints for contacts for their members for dealing with technical issues, and similarly security issues is now a big thing. Provide processes for handling complaints and incidents involving their members, and have published metadata registration practice statements. There's a number of boxes that you need to tick to join, but they're not overly onerous. And they need to follow the Aggregating SAML 2 metadata profile. And it's just a standard saying what needs to be published in your metadata for IDPs and SPs. And for entities registering in Aggregating, participating federations doesn't imply any right to communication with any entity exchange through Aggregating. So even though there's entities that are published, there's no guarantees that these entities will work or that you will get access to everything at Aggregating. There may be funds required to be transferred. There may be other exchanges that need to happen before those services can be made available to your users. And that's the end of that one. So that was Aggregating. Very simple, high-level look at Aggregating. Next, we're going to dive into types of services. Let's look at this one. Well, this may be of interest to a lot of folk who are looking for services to connect to their federation. So the killer app, and this has come up over and over again. Does such an app exist? And you say yes, no, or maybe. And it's really dependent on what you think a killer app is. And it also depends on the situation, the timing, and the needs of your community. For instance, Zoom within the COVID-19 situation has been a killer app because everyone needs a cost-effective solution for remote meeting with people. That will fade away as COVID fades away, hopefully. But it's the audience of the Federation will also dictate what their killer apps are, if any. In AF, we've seen that CloudStore, Nectar, NREN, some of the big research initiatives have really been our killer app. But it's not just a one service, it's a combination of many services that have brought the benefit of the Federation to our community. And that may be the same for you, or you might just get it lucky and find that app which everybody wants to access and access via the Federation. It's a bit of a chicken and egg problem. Without resources, there are no people who want to access the Federation because there's nothing to use. And without people, there's no resources who want to connect because there's no one who will actually use their service. So you've got to work out some way of getting both the services and the users in the same place at the same time. And that can be very difficult, particularly for newer federations, where you've still got to try and explain to people what the value proposition is for the Federation. I consider the chickens being the IDPs, and your chickens require an enterprise identity management solution or system, or at least some sort of store for your identity credentials and identity information. We heard this morning that one of the, Cambodia, one of their institutions doesn't have a directory server. They have all of their credential information within a database, and that's fine because the tooling, the IDP tooling, can use a database to retrieve the credentials and verify the identities against. A directory server is not an essential, it's a good thing because it's a useful tool to hold this identity information in a standard way. But you can, as I said, use a database. It just requires a little bit of additional configuration to your software. And preferably to have some sort of a provisioning system that takes personal details from sources of truth, such as the HR or student systems, and creates and maintains identity information in the directory or the data store or whatever. That can be then mined for the Federation to use. There's also the option of layering your identity providers. Federated Identity Management can provide an enterprise access management solution if you want, or you can buy into it a off-the-shelf identity solution such as Azure, Okta, WSO2, whatever, and run that as your enterprise identity provider, and then using a Federation-aware identity provider, layer that on top to gain the value, the benefits of your enterprise IDP. IDP for the organisation, it connects to your directory, connects to local services, connects to the National Identity Federation, and then connects out to the National Identity Federation. So we get SSO, single sign-on for everything across your organisation and beyond. So one of the first tasks that a federation operator needs to do is to go out and talk to their chickens or their IDPs or their universities and determine if their IDPs are in a suitable state to connect to the federation. Do they have the components required? Do they have a provisioning system? Do they have some sort of order in place to enable the deployment of the federation? Now we're looking at the different types of services. Publisher services is generally sought after by university librarians to provide content to their staff and students, research information, research data, and so forth. Each university may need a separate contract with each publisher, or you might have a consortium within your university sector that deals with publishers directly. In Australia, we have the core group, Council of University Librarians, that does a lot of work with publishers as a consortium. Many institutions may already have an existing contract, but are using an IP address-based authentication solution, such as Easy Proxy or some sort of proxying solution. They were good in their day, but they're way past their use by date, and most of the service providers should be moving to a federated model, which provides a whole lot of more benefits, including the improved user experience of using the federation. There was a project a few years ago called RA21, which was attempting to improve this, and there were some valuable initiatives that came out of the RA21 activity, including the seamless discovery service, which certainly helps the users in the discovery stage. Usage reporting is highly valued by the librarians, as we pointed out earlier. Librarians like to know what services are being used, and if they aren't being used, they'll be discarded for other options that will potentially get higher value or higher utilisation. Because the librarians are paying for access to these services, the university needs to make sure that their money is being well spent. And if a service isn't used, they're not spending their money well. We've also got many services, many of these types of services available by both Aggregating and the Open Athens Federation. And some publishers are only available by Aggregating. So if you try to directly connect to a publisher, they may say, no, you need to connect to us by Aggregating. So there's a bit of an emphasis, a prod to get your federation and your organisations into Aggregating so that they can effectively connect to as many services or publisher type services as possible. Most service providers that are publishers operate on a minimal attributes required, generally a yes/no. Some will want some additional information like an email address or a name to personalise the experience, or to be able to record that the user has previously visited and what information that they've previously accessed and recorded or used. So there's an opportunity to publicise your federation to university librarians for easy, improved access to these services for users. They'll still want their usage reporting. These services need to be funded, so they need to know if they're being effectively funded. And there's a bit of a note here that librarians will have some additional requirements. I'm actually doing a presentation at the Internet 2 conference about what librarians want from federations beyond what we currently provide. And I'll probably repeat that presentation in Nepal next year. Research tools and data. So this is a different community, people, different needs. They want access to tools, to services that can process data, that can store data, that can do stuff with the sort of activities that they're working on. So we have a number of services in the AF. One's an OpenStack service called Nectar, which provides access to virtual machines. We've got Jupyter systems, which I showed you this morning. We get some high-end science and research infrastructure. CERN, we get LIGO, which is international high-end projects. We've got the square kilometre array project. We've got ORCIDs, the use of ORCID will come up again and again as a PID, which is, adds extra value to the Federation. There's many science portals that are being created as we speak that will allow various communities of scientists to work collaboratively together within these portals. The Biocommons group are building a portal in Australia as we speak. The virtual labs, the Metadata services, file center, own cloud, and they're understanding privacy concerns, so they're building authentication or authorization into their tools. Research by groups generally is more complex. Authorization, onboarding, additional attributes that are coming from the group rather than, or from the virtual organization rather than from the home organization. And the need to provide multi-factor authentication even if the home organization doesn't do it. These types of tools generally have a much smaller audience, but they're highly valued by your governments because they bring in research funding, research activity, put your nation on the stage in a research way. And they can tend to attract funding to aid in the development and operation of your federation. These tend to be harder work, but at the end of the day, it's worth the effort to engage with your research communities and provide them a mechanism to easily access the tools and data that they need. Your collaboration tools, bringing researchers from different organizations together, can be topic or domain specific, or it can be fairly generic. There's many collaboration tools out there. There's video conferencing, wikis, blogs, etc. And some of these will require attributes to work effectively. Generally around the authorization and onboarding, activities may require extra attributes to enable those types of activities to occur. We're going to discount and offers type services. The vendor doesn't care about the user's identity, they just want to know the status of the user, is a staff person or an academic or a researcher. They generally look for the eduperson affiliation value, and there's two such services running at the moment. There's AAF's Verified service, or Verified, which currently supports Share ID, Student Beans and Uni Days, and others are considering it. And there's the EU's In Academia, which is another online student verification system. There's a possibility of some additional funding coming or being generated through these particular type of services. The model that we have set up is that it's a pay per authentication or pay per verification. So we're microcharging the verification services to determine if a person is a staff person or a student. And we're getting over 1,000 verifications a day. We're charging about 30 cents. So it soon adds up to a fairly good income for very little effort. So, services for your federation. Your vision and your mission will help you decide. Don't limit yourself to specific target audiences. Just have everything that's got potential. You won't know until you've tried it if services of value to your federation. You need to listen to your subscribers. Ask them what type of services that would benefit them. What services do they really want? This can be difficult, particularly if you're talking to the IT folk in your organisations, your unis. They will have very little understanding or knowledge of what their research people want. So it's difficult, but a lot of engagement work is really required to get a good feeling for what services are of value to your organisations. there's a bit of advice. Start with the low-hanging fruit, the easy ones to connect, get some experience with those, and that will help you in the future as you bring on more and more services. That ends that one. Any questions about services? It's always a topical thing. And the final one for this particular set of stuff is the national perspective. This is going to be very quick. Slides. So, what will your federation's role be? And this will depend on what your organisations want, what your government wants, what your users want. Some federations are really keen on providing access to publisher and journal material for their end users. And this is around cost savings generally, reduce cost of access, running as a consortium, buying in bulk, and getting the discounts from doing so. It also has the benefit of easy access for end users, or easier access by having access through single sign-on. It's supporting the librarian community. It's helping to protect the service provider by reducing the incidence of content theft, and it provides providing access to non-federated services is always going to be an issue, because there are some services that are still running IP-based authentication, and as we found out from Raj the other day, they're not that willing to move to a federated model, even if they're offered assistance to do so. So InFed are building their own federation proxy with these objectives in mind. So and are building their federation really around supporting their librarians. Is your federation there to support research? So are you improving collaboration opportunities for researchers? Are you trying to help researchers, service providers connect, so through training and professional services? As I said earlier, connecting research services is a much more complex activity, and they may need some dedicated professional services or professional assistance from your team to help them enable the service to participate in the federation. You might consider providing proxying services to connect your some of these more bespoke bespoke research services to your federation. A lot of services only know how to connect to a single IDP, so a proxy will help there. You need to also consider building advanced federation options, looking at federated groups, authorization options, providing a multi-factor authentication and a proxy rather than at each individual service, looking at how to do higher levels of assurance. You need to be involved in your national research conversation. We're heavily involved in that, and we are regularly sending people to our government and to big research activities to ensure that we're on the same page and providing the infrastructure and resources that they need. And so targeting the research institutions, you'll find some of the bigger universities heavily into research. In Australia, we call them generally the sandstone universities. They get the bulk of the funding for research, so we tend to go and talk to them much more than the other federation members. You also need to look at integrating PIDs into your federation, ORCIDs, RAIDs, and the many other PIDs that will enhance the usability and the way the federation can be used and how the data can be passed around. And the AAF is focused on this path. Another option is to provide a mechanism for vendors to determine the user's affiliation. So this is about the verification type services. And this is really not a type of federation, but it's just another an add-on that can be easily incorporated into your federation once you have enough mass of students or universities to make it worthwhile for the vendors to come and say, hey, we'd like to know who is a student in your country. We've had several conversations with a number of countries that are companies that are interested in doing such activities in the Asia Pacific region. So we'll be targeting some of those we've talked about. I think Indonesia's been mentioned, Sri Lanka's a possibility, Japan as well. Those with the more mature federations will benefit from these types of activities earlier. And will your federation try to do something else? It's really a question that you guys need to take on board and think about yourselves. And knowing what the focus and purpose of your federation is will help determine what resources are needed, what services to provide, and which organisations to target as potential members. So in Australia, we already have the majority of universities, and we're currently targeting our health research institutions to join the federation and connect to some of the new exciting stuff that is happening in research land. So the Biocommons area, there's a whole raft of activity happening in that space. The government has just put up a new data sharing service, which our health people are very interested in connecting to. And they see the federation as the easy way to connect. So that's good for us. So that's that one. Is there any questions on the national focus and how it is impact the federation?
Can you go back? What is the raids, Terry? You mentioned under identifiers, orchids and raids, but I've never not heard of that before.
That's a, let's check that. Research activity identifier. It is. It's something that came out of the University of Queensland, and it's basically a big bucket that you can put all your research activities, other PIDs into. And then you can attach that to identifiers that identify data sets or identify compute stuff, and that basically tags along with your research activity. It will allow you to then go and possibly repeat the science based on the content of the RAID. Okay.
So yeah, I found it. So it's an Australian initiative. I think it's very similar to you get this identifier if you apply for EC projects. I can't remember what it's called now, but you know, there's this one portal where everyone, where everyone can go and they get this persistent identifier for their projects. And as you see from Asia Connect projects, there's a grant agreement number when you finally get money, but obviously that's going to be different between different namespaces, between different funding agencies.
Yeah. So there is a push to make RAIDs globally available. Just looking for someone to run the service.
Mm.
I think ARDC are actually doing some work on getting a version 2 of RAID technology happening.
Yeah.
Okay, is Farhan about?
Oh, sorry.
Oh, there is.
Are you done?
I'm done for the first part.
Okay.
If you have your 10 minutes now.
Yeah, all right. So can you allow me to share my screen?
Sorry, yeah.
Okay, so I about to give a presentation, or rather to give some brief introduction about the Ifir X-Men project. So the Ifir X-Men stands for Ifir extension for Managed Application Network, which is the continuity from the Ifir project. So this is basically just a brief background about this Ifir X-Men, where it come from. So it's not came overnight. It's a continuity of the several effort or initiatives that the group or TFIAM has been working on. So it was kicked off by the Backfire project and then continued by the Ifir, and now is the Ifir X-Men project. So the project is approved and funded by EU, Asia Connect, and 10cc, and it's started from March this year until March next year. But this probability will be extended for a few couple of months, but it's not confirmed yet. But as for now, the project is until March next year. So there are three main activities of the project. So basically, number one is to capacity building, which is to train and the NREN and also federation operators about identity federation, and also we share the best practice in identity federation development. Okay, so basically sharing the experience from AAF and also Sifulan. Second is developing an identity federation software ecosystem, basically for those who would like to improve their federation infrastructure, or even if they want to offer IDP as a service to the community. So this is the objective of activity 2. So basically, Sifulan is developing identity federation infrastructure based on the cloud native technology or Kubernetes that can support cloud or on-premise. Campus means the IDP, either the IDP deploy on cloud provided by NREN, or on-premise, the infra provided by the campus. So it based on the what Sifulan has deployed in Sifulan Merchant Access Federation. Okay, so for the activity 2, is mostly on the hands-on activities. So, and the third one is I am ready, which is identity and access management or roaming competition, with support if there is an idea or proposal about an application that make use of identity federation. Okay, so for activity 1 is generally open for everyone, but for activity 2, mainly for NREN and federation operators, and for activity 3 is open for anyone. Okay, so to become a participant must be from Asia Connect country or economy members. Okay, so and able to provide a commitment or contribution to the success of the project. So for activity 1 and 2, participants should be a REN operator unless there is no REN operator in that country or economy, or the Identity Federation operator is not a REN operator. So for example, like in Australia and also in Malaysia, the operator of Identity Federation is not a REN operator. Okay, so that one is possible. And for activity 3 is open for anyone, even though female engineer participant is highly encouraged, but it's not limited to female only, so it's open. Okay, so the call for each activity will be made separately. So recently we have made a call for activity 2. Okay, and we have received several nomination, and we also have sent the invitation letter to attend the hands-on, the face-to-face session or hands-on training in conjunction with APNIC 54 next month at Singapore. Okay, so what is the benefit of this project to the participants? So number one is accelerate the adoption or implementation of Identity Federation and also eduroam, particularly for those who just started venturing into Identity Federation or has been implemented Identity Federation but struggling to get IDP on board. Okay, of course, it's networking to know people. Means that you have access to the Identity Federation or an eduroam expert. Number three is capacity building. Okay, and then access to Identity Federation expert. So we will provide travel support and also equipment or computing resources support if needed. So for some detail of the activity. So basically for the first activity is the one that you're currently attending right now, is this first has to be conducted virtual in conjunction with the APAN 54, but hopefully for APAN 55 it will back to the face-to-face, so where we can have a face-to-face training at the next APAN 55. So however, for this current training at the moment, we more focus on Identity Federation, and we'll be more focused to eduroam at the next training at APAN 55 later. So for the activity 2, we will have a hands-on training at Singapore. So basically you will deploy Kubernetes. I will talk in more detail about the technical detail on this cloud native based Identity Federation infrastructure tomorrow. Okay, so and this will be combined eduroam and federated identity as a service offering that can be deployed at NREN and institutional level. But for the upcoming hands-on, we more focus on the identity as a service. First, for eduroam, we'll do it later at APAN 55. So a server to run the appliance on application will be provided. So we will discuss on the procurement of this server or computing resources separately. Okay. So the third activity is basically we would love to have a proposal from anyone who would like to participate in this third activity. So you can submit the proposal through the link given in this slide in the Ifir Xman website, which is ifirxman.cfulan.my/activity-3. So there are 2 rounds. So the first round is you submit a proposal, and then after that we will select several proposals that we can support, and then after that we will do the real implementation or the deployment. It doesn't need to be production ready, even as a pilot is good enough. Okay, so and then once it's selected, then we can, once the proposal is accepted, then we can provide computing resources in form of virtual machines if to the participant if required. If you need a server, for example, to deploy your application or to develop your application, then let us know and we can provide those to you as well. And then a travel grant or support will be provided to attend the Ifir Xman for in-person or face-to-face event to present the work. So which is at the next APAN meeting at APAN 55 at Kathmandu, Nepal. So we'll provide conference registration, support, flight ticket, and also per diem as well to present your work. Okay, so there's a deadline for the proposal submission is on the 30th September 2022. Okay, so this is for everyone. You can share with your community as well. Okay, so if you're looking for some ideas, what kind of application or project, you can approach us at Ifir xman@civil.my for some ideas. So we'll see whether this will be interest for you and you have capacity to execute the to implement the idea into a pilot. All right, thank you. Any question about Ifir project? Okay, so for Ifir session at the Singapore, so definitely yes, you need to bring your own laptop. So for the computing resources, we will share with you shortly, because now we're trying to sorting out the procurement server procurement issue. So maybe for the upcoming event at Singapore, you would need to prepare several virtual machines. Okay, so I will share later what will be the technical requirement, and once we sort out the server procurement issue, so we can you can switch the device into the server that we're going to provide.
I have one question.
Yep.
As I saw, the MNET 54 will be happen from, I think, around 1 week, but in the invitation letter, I saw it's a 3 day, it's 3 day, 2 day. So basically, for us, we need to go since the beginning of MNET 54, just only the 3 day that you mentioned in the invitation letter.
Okay, Ferry, please correct me if I'm wrong. Okay, so you need to attend the our training on the, hang on,
Sunday and Monday. Yeah.
Yeah, Sunday and Monday. Yeah. So 11 and 12. Okay. So, but if I understand correctly, you can also attend the other ethnic event, but you need to attend our workshop on the 11 and 12. After that, beyond that date is up to you whether you want to stay to attend the remaining ethnic conference or you want to return back to your country. But as for per diem, we only support for the 10, 11, and 12 only.
Okay, I understand it. Thank you.
Okay, am I correct, Terry?
Yes, and the rest of the APNIC conference is free to attend as well. So
yeah, okay.
There's no conference fee, but you still have to organise your own accommodation beyond Monday.
Or stretch out the per diem that you're given for more days.
Yeah.
And so, Farhan, there'll be funding available for a certain number of nodes to be set up to replicate this funding, and people won't get that in time for the actual event. But if people don't get that funding from Ifir xman, are they able to, like, can people play along at home if they're willing to commit the hardware resources themselves? And what do you think are the approximate costs for an NREN or an organization that wants to operate the federation for them to do that?
Oh, the actual costs. Okay.
I mean, I know it's it's more a theoretical problem, right? Because you can spend as much as you want on a server. I think there's no upper limit. But for practical considerations, there is, there's a monetary limit on how much infrastructure will be purchased by each group.
Yep.
So based on that, what's the cost in either virtual machines or approximate dollars if someone isn't funded via Ifir X-Men but does want to deploy this sort of environment?
Oh, okay. So means that if, let's say, if there is a institution that not eligible to get funding for Ifir X-Men, but would still love to deploy the software stack, and how much that it costs? Am I correct? That's the question.
That is, yes.
Yeah. Actually, yeah, because for example, in case of Sifulan, we just purchase a server, and even the server that we purchased, it wasn't a brand new server. It's sort of like a refurbished, but it has a high specification. So I don't have the rule of thumb at the moment, but because we really the deployment base is based on Kubernetes, and according to Kubernetes recommendation for production setup, you need at least to have 3 servers for the Kubernetes master node, and for the worker node, I think there is but I would recommend at least 3 worker nodes. Okay, so for the master node, there are some recommendation, but based on our experience, we use like a 4 CPU cores and 8 GB memory for each master nodes. And for the worker nodes, okay, the rule is, of course, the bigger it is, the more IDP that you can host. Okay, so as starter, we use for each IDP, we set like a 2 CPU cores and 4 or 2 GB of RAM max, if I'm mistaken. But because in the deployment, there is the recommendation from Shibboleth is to have at least 4 GB memory, but in our use case, we only assign 2 GB because we use MDQ for metadata query instead of asking the IDP to download the full set of metadata. So due to that optimization, the requirement become less. Okay, so and then for the worker node, probably like 8 CPU cores, 16 GB memory. It's a good spec to start for each server, and so it's ×3. Okay, so maybe if you can have like a server with a physical server with like 60 GB memory and like a 48 CPU cores is already good for start. Okay, I think it can cover up to like what 10 15 IDP running IDP as a service on your infra.
I think people shouldn't necessarily overinvest, and also don't fear, don't
because
fear success, right? Because if it's successful, you can get more hardware.
Yeah, actually, the scaling is very easy for Kubernetes, and also the setup that we have. So if you need to increase the capacity, which is more IDP to host more IDP, you just need to add additional worker nodes. Okay, so the more worker nodes that you have, it doesn't necessary to be vertically like increase the RAM CPU. No, you don't have to, but you can add additional virtual machine to support. Okay, in fact, it's much better. I mean, for the high availability and reliability. Yeah, you don't have to invest big for the beginning. Even if you let's say if you want to operate, like I think it's for Cambodia, for example, right? Most of the organization already have Office 365, which is use Azure AD at the back end. So you just need to set up IDP in the proxy mode, which is quite lightweight, because as most of the heavy lifting, which is the authentication and user database, are offloaded to Azure instead on your own infra. So I think even with quite decent infra, you can host a lot of IDP already.
Okay, hopefully to see on the MNET 54 for Monetize on this one.
Yeah. Okay.
Yes.
So
Yes.
I will send the server requirement within the latest is by next week. So that you can prepare before you go to Singapore, because there's some other requirement like a domain and also IP addresses as well.
Okay, thank you.
Welcome.
Actually, there is a question earlier. Actually, I was unable to unmute earlier. Can you please look at the questions on the chat box?
Yeah.
About the library access, right?
No, actually, yeah, Terry already mentioned that there is a situation of chicken and egg between the resources and the peoples. And actually, we had the peoples, but the problem is the resources. So how can we start with those things? I think, yeah, that is the main issues. I think mostly in the developing countries, as universities are not well funded, and they are not able to subscribe the costly scientific journals and other applications. I agree that there are some other open sources as well, but that is the thing they need, but it is some sort of difficulties in terms of resources. So can you guide us? How can we proceed on that condition?
When you say resources, you're talking about journals. Is that what you mean by resources?
Yeah, Brooke, mainly the journals for now. Yeah, maybe that there are other applications and services as well. But yeah, my focus is the journals.
I think journals are a slippery slope for an NREN to go down as a way of justifying use, because and you should be working with organizations like Ifir, who are, or your national library, to procure access to journals, or promoting access to even open access journals are problematic, becoming increasingly problematic in Australia. They don't require authenticated access to read the content. They still need it for the submission of journal content, but they're moving the cost from the university library for access purposes to the individual school or faculty for publishing purposes. And so that's equally becoming problematic. My wife is a dean of a university that does not want to fund her staff to publish in open access journals, because currently the library has the funding for access to journal content, and that funding hasn't been distributed to the faculties. So I think you should look at mechanisms that do make journals available for a wider audience. And I'm not sure whether whether Nepal fits into that. But yeah, I think that's one of the reasons Terry brought up service catalog, because people don't know what they can get access to and under what terms, what requires a subscription, what's free. And I mean, one of the examples that I often give is I think it's the Charles Uni in the Czech Republic, make high resolution.
The atlases.
Yeah, they make very high resolution biomedical images available if only you can log in.
Yeah.
Right? And so they're not willing to give guest accounts. That's a burden that they don't want to take on, but they're willing to allow other identity federations, identity providers to access that service. And so, yeah, I think still a well-resourced service catalog is still needed to make the case for the things that you can get access to, or the things that you could get access to. Now, interestingly, I have some students working on that from the Uni of Tas. But I think the service catalog has been a holy grail for a while. And yeah, and we need to do better.
Okay. Actually, in regards to, maybe I just comment on the first one. Probably the one way to lower down the cost to subscribe is journal by forming a consortium. But again, another issue is, for example, what is, let's say the consortium has negotiated with the publisher certain amount, and then after that, what is the access method to this? Or for example, like maybe your government pay for all public institution, but then how the institution can access these resources? What is the guarantee that the access is come from a member of the public institution? So in this case, Identity Federation is the answer to that. Because of the unauthorized access, the number of unauthorized access can be cut down to very minimum. So means that the consortium can negotiate for a much better pricing, or more affordable pricing model. That's one thing. And then second is about sorry, Brooke, what was the last one that you said?
Service catalog, or
yeah, service catalog. Okay, so actually we in Sifulan also did some curation. Okay, currently there is a service catalog from Refets MET, but it's really like sort of like a dumping ground over there. So I think our team has curated some like word to see, or some like a good services that you can access. So maybe we could also share that list to and NREN as well, that you can use that list to promote to your university. So I have a question for NREN, for NREN. Do you plan to monetize the federation, for example, like imposing a membership fee, or you will provide the service for free to your NREN member?
Yeah, Farhan, actually, at current, we are planning to operate the federations as a part of the NREN.
Okay.
But it will, yeah, from that part, it will be services, right? So they use the RAN connectivity and they will get the extra services. I think we are thinking for that way. Otherwise, it will be difficult because of the affordabilities. Yeah, universities are not willing to pay more for these research and other publications. Yeah, that is the problem of the developing countries, I think. And another with regard to your answers, how is your experiences regarding the consortium models to deal with the publishers? So,
okay.
Yeah,
so I think our folks from India, Raja, knows better how to deal with the publisher, because even in Malaysia, we don't, we just sort of like facilitating, helping the ministry to negotiate with the publisher. Maybe Raja knows in more detail, but because you will be offering Identity Federation as part of your service, then actually it's become much more, the task become much more easier for you, right? Because like in Sifulan and also AAF, we charge a membership fee, and it's not that easy to convince the university to be on board. So I think in your case is much better than our case. So once the university are connected with Identity Federation, then you have already a good a strong ground to help with the government or the university to negotiate further with the publisher or with the resource provider.
Yeah, I mean, this is why EIFL, EIFL.net. So see if they work in your area. I think Arena's got some presentations at APAN, and you can hunt her down in Hoover and make contact. And it's best negotiated with your national library, you know, for something like that, because they're experts, and EIFL actually have an example of this where Jordan, the country, got a World Bank loan for access to journal resources, and World Bank, loans are published. So when they got this loan dedicated for access to library journals, the price of the journals rose to meet the available cash, and they had money for 2 years. And once that loan money ran out, the journal prices maintained their high level, because it was known that this was a price point they were willing and once able to pay. And now they're unable to pay that, but the journal companies know that this is the price that you should be paying. And so that's why it's difficult, and that's why I've objected to attempts to get TAIN and Asia Connect project to subsidize journal access, because it's not a long-term or sustainable solution. One of the things I just put in the chat is also a lot of journals have IP-based authorization, IPv4 based authorization, and Raja spoke about that yesterday. There are programs that will give free access to least developed economies, so Nepal's included in that, as well as many others in the region. But you need to make sure that your institutions have separated IP address space, because those journal companies want to sell it. They're willing to give it free to research and education purposes, but they want to sell it to government. They might want to sell it to healthcare. They might want to sell it to non-government organizations and businesses. And so they don't want the address space polluted. So, if you've got customers that are on, what do you call it? If you've got customers that are on ISPs with heavily natted environments, then they're sharing the IP address space with business and government and NGOs. And so the journal companies just don't want to deal with rapidly changing IP address space, allocations. And so it could be a situation where there are many thousands of journals currently available to Nepalese researchers that just can't be turned on simply because of the IP address space issue.
Yeah, another thing is one of the problem with IP based is there is no guarantee that people who accessing is member of your organization, right? So, for example, in some universities, Malaysia, even there is an eduroam here, but sometimes they didn't put the eduroam users into separate network, that the gateway IP is not registered with the journal, because the contract said that the access must come from the member of the university, which is student or staff or maybe some alumni. If let's say somebody from another university come using the network or Wi-Fi, they shouldn't be given access to this, or they shouldn't have the access because it's beyond the contract. So because of this unauthorized access, the publisher factor into their subscription costs. Okay, so by using Identity Federation, so you have a total control to who has the access. Means that the number of unauthorized access can be cut down significantly. So because of that, then you can negotiate for better pricing. Is that let's say I guarantee that people who access is truly member within our organization, not unauthorized. If there is an unauthorized, of course we cannot control. Means let's say somebody who shared the login account with their friend or colleague. But if you imagine, for example, let's say you integrate your Identity Federation with your email, with your intranet system, then the person would think twice before they share their account, because somebody who knows my account can also access my email and so on. So I will protect with my life and my soul my user ID. So in this case, the unauthorized access can be lowered down significantly. So that is what we are. I think our Indian Access Federation has a very good experience on this, cutting down the unauthorized access. So.
Okay, thank you for that. And Brooke?
Yeah, go ahead with your question, Rod.
No, I didn't have other questions. Thank you.
It's just thanking you for your answers, Book, and Brian.
Yeah. So we need to maybe look and maybe get some people from Research for Life, which is a World Health Organization funded project that at least when I went to their website says that they offer some 16,000 120,000 books, 16,000 journals, 64 reference sources and 12 databases for the university, faculty, college community of Nepal. So maybe we need to get a better idea from them how best to access that, how it can be facilitated by federated access if it can't be facilitated by IP authorization, and get a better idea of these services, because even if someone else is providing these services for free, if the NREN or the Federation can prove that there's access facilitated by them, that encourages, that might encourage the deployment at the campus level, if that's the thing that unlocks access to these resources.
Yeah, Brooke, absolutely. Yeah, we need that, and might be the research fellows or people working on that will be helpful. And actually, this is the issue. Like as NREN is also saying from the very early days that in terms of the research and education network, so most of the RENs were just more focused on the connectivity, but we were talking about applications and other services over the REN, right? So this is the same case for, so far I understand this is the same case for these federations as well. There is a technical side, but we also need to have access to the content. So we need to go parallelly, I think.
Yeah, I think that's, unlocking the content that people have access to, could have access to, finding those valuable services and then promoting them is, it's still a holy grail. Oh, sorry, I got my video off. But yes, that's one thing. I remember talking to the Armenian Federation when they were developing things, and they said, do we focus on identity providers or do we focus on services? And actually, you have to have both. There isn't a situation where you can, you need the identity providers to unlock the accounts for your constituency, but you need those services so they've got something to log into. I mean, Terry and I were part of an earlier federation effort where basically every university only had an instance of Atlassian Confluence and a help desk tool. And all you could do is log in from your university into a different university's help desk tool or a different version of Confluence, right? And it was interesting technically, but it was very quickly, it was interesting for the IT people to prove that it worked, but it had no value to the researchers. And so then there was this group of technology universities that were sharing learning content. And that was the original use case. Actually, Terry had developed an authentication system pre-SAML to support the authentication so that this group of 8 technology universities could all go and visit specific content that was shared.
Wasn't I glad when that went away?
Yeah, but that was it was interesting. The SAML or the Federation was not the driver for that. The driver was getting access to content. And we had 8 universities willing to collaborate because the content was so useful and a solution was developed. Now, unfortunately, it was developed in a time before a standards-based approach was able to be tackled. And then the same thing happened. The Spanish developed their own federation tool called PAPI, and the Dutch developed their own tool called aSelect. And so lots of people had the need for access to content and work on that. At least now we don't, we don't have that problem. The protocol is SAML. There's at least 3 open source tools that drive that, as well as additional tools to facilitate that work. And so, yeah, the next big thing that we have to work on, and I think we need a groundswell of federations to then be able to better identify. And so what I'm trying to do with my students is identify the services a university doesn't have access to. So for instance, it would allow a technical college in Kathmandu to find out there are all of these services they don't have access to because they haven't approached NREN to get access to Identity Federation. And I think that will be the next saleable point, particularly if they can then also see other universities that do have access to those resources. So I think it's the resource.
Okay, coming up to.
But one more thing, don't wait for me, right? Everybody needs to work on this, right? Yes, I want to solve this service catalog, but I'm serving it, trying to solve it from the point of view of a student or a researcher at a uni. Met really solves it from the point of view of a federation operator. And so you got to work out what your target market is, and yeah. So sorry for talking over you, Terry.
That's all right. Happens all the time. So just about out of time for today. I'm just having a look at what's on the agenda for tomorrow. Farhan, do you still require the first half of the session to be closed?
For tomorrow?
Yeah.
Yes. For my session, at least.
Okay, I'm not sure how we're going to do that, but we'll just try.
What if someone is Kubernetes and Activity 2 curious?
Yeah, I think can.
Because
just make it open, Terry, because it's very generic info.
I think just making it clear that some people will get hardware support to do this work, and others that don't get hardware support will well
Yeah,
they'll need to invest. Yeah.
our friend from Mozambique, right?
Yeah, exactly.
You
if they want to play along and do
this.
the same sort of thing, but it will cost. Yeah, I just found out that my my funding proposal to build a Timor-Leste federation has failed. So those guys will have to work out how to find the money to do the same sort of thing and play along.
Okay.
So
all right.
Tomorrow, we're out of time today. Tomorrow we will have stuff on the Ifir Expand project. The first half will be Farhan and the team who is coming to Singapore, plus anyone who is interested in sort of listening in and maybe wanting to set up their own set of infrastructure on their own kit at home. After that, I will spend some time continuing on with today's content, because we just ran out of time for that, on what the Federation operator's role is. And then we'll have morning tea/lunch, and then after that there'll be a session on Eduroam. So we'll have excuse me, Namal from the Indian NREN talking to us about what they're doing with their Eduroam deployment. And I will try and blunder my way through what we need to do for setting up an NREN in Eduroam, which will be a learning process for myself. And hopefully you'll get something out of it. We'll see how we go. And then a few weeks down the track, we'll be in Singapore doing this face-to-face with a number of you fine folk. Hopefully you've got something useful out of today's Back to Basics on Federation and the Ifir X-Man project update from Farhan this afternoon. Thanks everyone for attending. And we'll
Thank you, Terry, for putting everything together for us all.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
So thank you. See you tomorrow. Bye-bye.
Brooke, I've organised a thing for Thursday evening, 6 o'clock, for chatting to Mozambique.
Oh, today, this week. Yes.
This week. That's
okay.
You can join us if you like. I think it's a good idea that they start over.
Yeah. And it's been so long. So I think, luckily, policy and all of that work is in place, right?
Yeah.
So the only issue is signing key and infrastructure. And I guess if we have copies, if we have old copies of the metadata, they haven't gone away, right? So the institutional stuff is potentially still available. It's
Possibly.
just a centralized infrastructure.
Yeah, the last time I talked to them, they had difficulty just keeping their infrastructure going because of power.
Yep. That's
The servers just died because there's no electricity to drive them.
Yeah, I think that's. I mean, one of the things. Yeah, I saw an interesting thing about how do you keep an internet exchange point going under power disruptions, mostly for South Africa, right? How do you make lightweight infrastructure? Sometimes you can't always, and you don't want to always host it in Amsterdam when you're Mozambique away, because I was talking to him about it, and they have this, yeah.
Anyway.
Yeah, I mean, we made that attempt. We made that attempt to have a default IDP, and Gerrit said no because we're actually making some progress. But at least my proposal for recording's back on again.
Yep. I'll turn it back on.
Okay. But yeah, the file sender proposal that I've sent into Tane is also to have a default identity provider.
All right.
But you know, that will always be problematic. But trying to limit it by known academic, you know, known academic organizations.
Just checking something that I missed.
Answer to Farhan's question, no.
Numbers on this. Oh, the CAFMOS, that's the one. Yes, it's got a big red star against it at the moment. Still registered in Aggregating.
Oh, CAFMOS, yes, because it's based on a cafe from Brazil.
Yeah.
Yep.
We did have a crack at setting up, what's his name, the Jagger instance.
Yep.
So I wasn't really listening when Farhan was talking about how many servers we need to bring.
Yeah, lots. Because was he saying three just for the head node to make that reliable, and then workers beyond that. So not too sure how. You have to. It's supposed to have an odd number, so you can have one head node. Downside is if that's down, no further updates to your infrastructure until that's back. So yeah, so never two, because they'll fight it out on who's in charge. So you need three. So one or three. I think that's the argument for clocks. Apparently the argument, if you go to C, you have to take 1 or 3 clocks to C. If you have 2 clocks and they're not the same time, you're not sure which one's correct. If you've only got 1 clock, that's the only one you can do now. Yeah, you've got no choice but to believe the 1 clock you have. So yeah, but I think it'd be interesting to see some installations will have just a single head node, 2 worker nodes, and you know, hopefully through their own success, they'll be able to justify more infrastructure.
I asked our head of technology here this morning how many boxes that the AF is running to manage our infrastructure. We run a hosted solution for hosted IDP for 40 something IDPs, of which it's at least 2 nodes running and two versions, one in production, one in test. They said at least 120 EC2 instances in AWS.
Yep.
But we are looking at moving to Kubernetes as well.
Not a virtual background now. I'm in a historic building.
I'll take mine off first. And that's my background, boring plasterboard, wall and a half of white.
It's actually, I've got a Queensland-esque day outside. It's actually really quite sunny.
All right. Yeah, it looks like that outside my office as well.
Like I didn't show you yesterday. It was actually
windy.
Yeah, very windy, very stormy. Yeah.
Yeah.
Alrighty.
Okay. I'm going to go learn about Edgeroom.
Okay.
Yeah, see everyone later. See you tomorrow.
Bye.